part of what we're trying to capital on is this, call it self-preservation, but that leaders in the caucuses are finding it more and more difficult to lead. And that is really important in Pennsylvania because we are not an initiative state. So any change that we pursue has to be through a legislative path. We've got to convince folks who got elected by one set of rules to agree to change those set of rules in partly their interest, the interest of the Commonwealth, but also in the interest of their own political fortunes. Just let me back up a second, and let me tell you who the we is. Up until 2 weeks ago, I was the CEO of the Committee of 70, which is probably one of the oldest nonpartisan good government groups in the country, founded in 1904. But about midpoint last year, I loved that job. We did great work around the 2020 election, which was kind of significant in Pennsylvania, you may have noticed. But around the end of last year, I thought to myself, you know what? I really want to pour my energies into someone mentioned playing offense rather than defense. Maybe that was Daniella. Playing offense rather than defense. I want to see if I can help bring two things about. One of which I've been pursuing the last 4 years, and that's fair redistricting. And we're in the throes of that right now, but I'll leave that for another topic. And the other is opening primaries to independent voters. So I resigned and stepped down as CEO of Committee of 70, and now I've taken up the cause of open primaries. Short story is, in the last few months, we've been building the team. We have a terrific team of consultants, media folks, political consultants, two of whom, interestingly, one is the former chair of the Pennsylvania Republican Party, the other the former chair of the Democratic Party, who are both staunch proponents of opening primaries. We have put together a campaign plan that ballpark says we're going to need about $1.8 million to pull this off or die trying. The good news is we've raised about $450,000 so far, and we'll be out beating the bushes in the next couple months to get us over the top. And we've done taken three foundational steps, which are really critical to any kind of an effort, particularly in a place that's complicated, has complicated politics like Pennsylvania. One is we commissioned a really good poll from a reputable Republican pollster that suggested, this may not come as a shock, but very strong support for open primaries from Democrats, Republicans, obviously independents of all ages, races, geography. Everywhere you go, you get between 65 and 85% approval. The challenge is the percentage of people who see this as a problem is not nearly as high. So our challenge is to energize this issue, to make it appear not just like an, oh, well, that's life, but this is a real problem. That'll touch on some of the themes that Jeremy mentioned. The second thing is that we have followed that poll up with focus groups. In fact, Jeremy knows this. Even as we speak, we have two focus groups going this evening, virtual focus groups with Republicans and Democrats, to get some more insight into that question of how we can turn sort of a condition into a problem. And the third foundational activity we've been involved in is doing really good research on independent voters in Pennsylvania. We're only about 10% in Pennsylvania, so nowhere near Maine or where Florida is. But one thing that the research has revealed, and I think this could be really significant, and I mentioned this to Jeremy the other day, independent voters in Pennsylvania are highly concentrated in the southeastern part of the state and Lehigh Valley up through the Poconos and those counties that border on New Jersey. Moreover, they seem to be inordinately concentrated in cities like Reading and Allentown and Bethlehem and Scranton and Wilkes-Barre, which are notable because they have very fast-growing Hispanic populations. And we're still playing this out with the numbers, but our hunch is that a good number of those independent voters are also Hispanic voters. And if that proves to be the case, that gives us a very powerful message to make about fundamental voting rights for a slice of the population that is really coming into its own in Pennsylvania. So we have a lot of ground to cover. I was taking notes on Jeremy's presentation, noting that you got to be in it for the long game. We hope to be there for the long game. Right now, we're concentrating on 2022. We have a governor whose term will end at the end of the year, and we're calibrating our efforts on his presence, but we'll see what happens after that. So I feel like this is more of a preview of coming attractions, but also making the point that if we can pull this off in Pennsylvania, which is as purple a purple state as you get and is a big, messy, complicated, consequential state, I think we'll be able to make a really important statement about all of the values and outcomes that we've talked about tonight. So hope that gives you a taste of what we're up to. And now it looks like, Jason, I was going to say it's 22 degrees here in Philadelphia. So I'm wondering, is it colder here than in Alaska? What do you got today?
Well, if you would have asked me last week, the answer was yes. It was about -5 where I'm at in Anchorage last week, but right now it's 34. So it's a tropical heat wave. So you can be jealous that I might be wearing shorts when I go pick up my kids here later this afternoon. But
over to the sunshine state of Alaska then.
Well, hi everyone. My name is Jason Grenn. I'm the executive director for a nonprofit called Alaskans for Better Elections. Alaskans for Better Elections was the group that was behind the ballot measure 2 that passed in 2020 here in Alaska by 1.5%, about 4,000 votes. It did 3 major things. It opened up our primaries to a top 4 non-affiliated open primary system, and it enacted ranked choice voting in the general election. And it also changed our campaign finance laws. And so it did a number of things that exposed quote unquote dark money in campaign spending here in our state. So a kind of a 3-for-1 type of ballot initiative that for a number of reasons, made both parties mad, made both incumbents and new candidates mad, but in the end, voters, as they always do, had their say and really thought that this was something that would be good for Alaska. And I say that with on the back of what many things like Jeremy said and David said, that this was kind of a momentum kind of happenstance here in Alaska. We had a number of reforms passed through ballot measure in the last 10 years. Alaska is a strange and unique state. Sometimes we're libertarian, sometimes we're very conservative, sometimes we're very progressive. But we've had things like automatic voter registration passed through ballot initiative, the commercial of marijuana sales passed through ballot initiative, a number of other things. And then I had the honor of being in the state legislature as an independent, non-affiliated state representative, and was help pass ethics changes with our lobbyists and other type of good governance reforms. And so in the past decade, voters have kind of seen that they have the power to help change these things for the betterment of their state. And 2 things really happened. I think that 3 things really helped push us over the edge in terms of victory passing this reform. One, our group really worked with Alaska Native groups and Alaska Native voting blocks around the state. For a very long time, that group usually is ignored or put on the back border when it comes to state ballot initiatives or people who are running for statewide office, U.S. Senate or governor. They are off our road system. Alaska has 1 road, and much of our state is off of that road system, rural Alaska. And so it is hard to get to and sometimes hard to work with groups in those communities. But our group decided that since this was going to be such a fundamental change that would really help them on issues that were important to their groups and their communities, we worked with them probably first and foremost more than any other group to talk about the changes and how it would benefit their groups. And so number one, we talked with groups that were sometimes felt like they were on the outside looking in when it came to these big changes. Number two is during the election cycle of 2020, of course, we had closed primaries still, and we saw 7 Republican incumbents lose in low voter turnout primary elections to very extreme Republican candidates. And I think that was kind of a shock to the system. People who consider themselves moderates or independents who vote more conservatively saw that candidates who are willing to work across the aisle to work and get things done, regardless of what the party platform might be, they were punished in their closed primary system and lost to the more extreme candidates. And I think, again, we use that as something to say, you know, we looked at the data, shared the data with voters to say, you know, again, like Peter mentioned and Jeremy mentioned, you know, these closed primaries were keeping independent voters out. They were punishing incumbents for doing what would be perceived as the right thing. And so that was just 3 months before the election where the ballot measure 2 would appear on. And so we pivoted a little bit and used that as a talking point to say, you know, that our state has been in gridlock really politically with some fiscal issues and other issues for the past 5 or 6 years, special session. And I think voters were tired of that, combined with seeing incumbents who are working with both parties lose at the polls was kind of a stop and pause thinking moment for a lot of voters. And then thirdly, during some debates, the Republican Party and Democrat Party agreed that if this new ballot measure would pass, that it would be the end of political parties here in Alaska. Well, to a lot of people, especially in Alaska, that has 63% of our voters don't belong to any of the 2 major parties. We use that talking point to kind of, again, showcase that parties were trying to keep hold of their control and hold of their power, as opposed to letting voters express themselves more freely in an open primary and ranked choice voting general election. Obviously, a number of things, grassroots work, working with current incumbents, getting national advice and national best practices from many of the experts and people who are on this call were part of the successful campaign. But now our work has shifted from a campaign mode, obviously, to now in the past 14 months and beyond, moving into the election this fall, where these new practices will be enacted. We're doing a tremendous amount of voter education, a tremendous amount of work working with our Division of Elections, everything from, you know, presentations to large nonprofits and large for-profit groups, to doing presentations from at your local Rotary and Chamber of Commerce's, to community councils, radio shows, op-eds, training candidates, training division election administrators, just everything you can think of. I wish it was just vote your favorite, you know, rank your favorite beer and cookie type events, but it's so much more than that. I think Jeremy said that the hard work really does happen after something does pass. And so we've just been working tirelessly on all sorts of different ways to get voters engaged, inspired, and confident when they go to the polls in August and November here, that they'll know how to fill out the ballot. They'll understand the power that they have, and I'm hopeful that it's a successful implementation here in about 10 months. So happy to answer questions. I know there's lots for many different people, but really appreciate being on the panel, and I'll look for chats in the box. Thanks.
I'm going to interrupt for a second because it's just about hit 6:30, which was our presumed timing for the whole meeting. But the panelists, I think, have agreed to stay on longer. So for those of you who can stay, please do. I'd also encourage you, if you haven't already, take a look at the chat and maybe copy it and make a note of it somewhere, because we do have quite a bit of interesting information, some questions that I'm sure will be handled by Daniella from Nebraska and Arizona. And I think we also have quite a bit of input from Ned Foley, who has joined the meeting. And I want to make sure that you take a look at some of what he's got there. He's the director of the Institute for Democratic Engagement and Accountability, as well as a professor of constitutional law at Ohio State University, and has written quite actively on things like the sore loser laws and the 19th century laws, which we do think we're going to address in a future program, because they really were the source of the congressional work, as well as state level work that could have sabotaged the 2020 election and are certainly a huge risk for 2024. So Danielle, I'll now turn it over to you. We are going to go for at least another 15 minutes to try to address some of the questions and have some further conversation with the more than 100 people that participated in tonight's program.
Great, thanks. David and Jason, you've seen the vigorous questions in the chat. Do you want to pick up one of them in particular around kind of, relative value of reforms, or should I jump in on some of them?
I'm going to take sort of the smorgasbord approach. I think this speaks to what Jeremy said earlier. We can get really tangled up in debating the merits of this rather than that. And at the end of the day, I think it's really hard to sort out, except, and I think this is something Ned Foley pointed out, you have to look for upstream reforms. You have to look for things that change the rules of the game, so that you change the incentives for people who are running for office, which is apart from, ideas that just bring more voters to the polls, or we're getting mired down into all kinds of, I think, relatively minor issues around, drop boxes or voter ID, so forth. You can debate on that, but so you got to keep your eye on the ball on these what I call these upstream challenges. And to Jeremy's earlier point, understand that they look for opportunities for one to build on another, because people have a funny, generally speaking, don't look kindly on things that are new, particularly the political class. Start talking about new and improved, and they run for cover. But if you can relate it to something that's already happened, that's baked into the culture of the state or the community that you're in, I think you have a much higher probability of success. But it is still, and I've spent most of my career in Pennsylvania. Places like this are really, really hard. It's really hard.
Yeah, I mentioned that Alaska, we had kind of had a swing in our momentum with ballot measures and such. And I think this idea that we had with ballot measure 2 was more of its time had come. It was the perfect storm here in Alaska. I mentioned we had been about 6 years of gridlock with huge deficits, running out our savings, no end in sight to legislative sessions that nothing ends up happening. And as I mentioned, when I served in the state house, I'd often get told, well, we can't do this, this will hurt me in my primary. And we hear that everywhere, around America, that, the primary now is a weapon for parties to use on people. And even from at a small level, at a state house race, to the U.S. Senate. Alaska obviously is kind of ground zero when it comes to moderates who are running again for U.S. Senate. Lisa Murkowski, who has her own history, as we heard from Peter. And I think Alaskans were tired of nothing getting done because politics was in the way, and they couldn't, politicians couldn't focus on policies. They had to focus on politics, which is just a perfect recipe for nothing to get done. And so again, for our state, it was the top 4 ranked choice voting, open primary system made sense for us. And it's not you can't carbon copy that to every state, especially when it comes to timing or what the makeup is of the legislature or how things are being ran in that state. But so I think seeing that the reform and seeing how it fits within your state is an important step back to see how it fits, because not every, as we said, it's not one size fits all, but it worked really well for Alaska. And so I think pushing pause and looking at that, talking to the reform leaders in your state, seeing what small step might happen and lead to a larger step 4, 5, 6 down the road, if we have 4 or 5, 6 years down the road, given the state of our world right now. But looking at that, where you can start and what it fits with your state is an important question to ask.
One thing I just wanted to add to what Jason said that I think is really important to understand about the open primaries issue is, and this really speaks to how different communities come to this issue from different places. And that is that the open primaries issue is both a voting rights issue, an issue about whether all voters can participate in all public elections. And it's also an issue about structural reform, about creating more accountability and more incentives for legislators to be responsive to their constituents. So different communities, different people can come to this issue in different ways, depending upon the political situation that they are encountering. And we've seen that. And that's why you've seen so many different types of open primaries campaigns around the country, and why you're also seeing open primaries interact with so many other different types of voting issues. I saw in the chat, someone mentioned automatic voter registration, which has been a big reform to a number of states have started to enacting. I like to think of the automatic voter registration as the Trojan horse of open primaries. And I say that because what you see happening in states that have been early adopters of automatic voter registration is that when voters are given, new voters are given the choice about how to register themselves, they are overwhelmingly registering as independents. Oregon, something like 70% of new voters coming in through automatic voter registration are registering independent. It's been so dramatic that it's put incredible pressure on the political system in Oregon, which is also a closed primary state, to respond. And it was also one of the drivers in Maine, where legislators had just enacted automatic voter registration and then had to contend with the fact that a majority of people coming in through that new system weren't allowed to participate in the primary. So it's really important to look at the totality of what's happening politically in a community and how different reforms can work together and interact to build a better democracy.
Yeah, well, I think that's it. I haven't heard that framing on automatic voter registration. I think that's really valuable. There's a question in the chat about kind of public education on all of these issues and ultimately, how do you build really mobilization? And I wanted to make a comment on that and then open it to others. And I know, Jeremy, you do a lot of that work as well, is that I think what we've seen is overall in the general public, and what we look at a lot is how to, business people and alumni business schools and others interact with these issues, even a highly informed audience, of which all of you are in many ways, an overeducated, we have an overeducated group of people here. We are all not well, most of us, several years ago, were very ill-informed about kind of the design of the state system, the state of the system, the risks to the system, et cetera. And I would argue that the need to communicate that, both the risks and these opportunities like open primaries, are massive, and that for many on the phone who have business platforms, marketing platforms, et cetera, that innovation of communicating these things is going to have to happen from a much broader group than that is currently happening today, and encourage all of you to really think about how you can use your platform to communicate about these risks and opportunities and start to educate your networks. And I know all of us on the line are helping to help arm you to do that. But do any of the speakers want to speak to this public education question further, and how we do that, or where you've been successful in doing that in a meaningful way?
Well, let me just pipe up, and I'll use this as a part of my exit line, actually. So I said before and during and after this session, we're doing focus groups with voters tonight to hear them talk about these concepts. And I listened to the first half hour, and the first lesson that pops out is most people don't really think about this stuff very often. so then the question is, how can you relate this to something that they do care about? You've got to practice a little bit of kind of creative association, I guess. And I think, again, credit to Jeremy, it comes back to reminding people about basic values that we care about in this country. Individual rights to vote, competition in elections, and the value of competition, and then just basic fairness. I mean, that's I think what we're hoping we can build a platform on here, and to some extent, I was struck by this question about, do we take on this issue of hyperpartisanship head on and suggest this is in fact an antidote to that, or does that make people somewhat wary of something like this? But I said I'm going to use this as part of my exit line because I do want to get back to the last 20 minutes of our focus groups. So I'll bid my adieu, and thanks so much for allowing me to be part of this. And Danielle, back to you.
Great. Well, I want to hand it back to the organizers, though Ned Foley has been very active in the chat and is a great expert on these issues. And I just wanted to see if you wanted to add something before I hand it back to Mike and Herb.
Well, thanks very much. I've enjoyed the conversation, and I really appreciate the opportunity to be here, and would be delighted to, pursue this more with any of you in whatever way would be constructive. I echoing, I think, a point that you made and others have made. I think we're at a particular moment in American history, where the concern about the integrity of our entire democratic electoral system is perilous. I don't think we can deny that. And my own analysis of that is, Peter Baker had a line in his column for the New York Times on January 6th, describing just in a factual term, the degree to which, former President Trump purges members of his party who cross him, who contradict him, and that other candidates wanting to win primaries in that party want his endorsement. And that kind of control that he has over which Republicans get to the November election ballot, to me, is the single most dangerous pathology of our current system. And if we didn't have this kind of risk of authoritarianism, which I think we have to be candid about, we might be, FDR was notorious in the 1930s for wanting to have some loyalty tests within his party's primary. But I think political scientists and election law professors wouldn't think of that as dangerous to the structure of democracy, because that kind of party loyalty in that context was a component of a well-functioning system. I mean, yes, we had, before the 1965 Voting Rights Act, we were an imperfect democracy, but we counted votes in the 1930s and 40s, and we awarded election winners to declared winners. We didn't have the problem that emerged in 2020. And so, again, I think other professors who studied this share my assessment to some degree, but my own assessment is that the single most important issue on the democratic reform agenda is solving what some people call the primary problem, which means breaking this capacity for an authoritarian movement to affect what the voters in November achieve. And I think a lot of the comments tonight about the need for open primaries feeds into that and is related to that. I think they're different. In the law world, we talk about nonpartisan blanket primaries as well as open primaries versus closed primaries. And happy again to engage in this conversation with any of you in a way that would be useful. I'm in a listening mode tonight, as I'm trying to be, and I do think there are different ways in which opening up primaries addresses this acute concern. And I think there probably are some ways that are more effective than others in meeting this acute concern, but it's kind of an all hands on deck moment, and we have to figure out a way, to preserve our democracy and address this issue. So thanks for letting me share those thoughts.
Danielle, I just wanted to add one quick thought before we conclude, because it really connects to the question you raised about public education. I think we're all concerned about the state of our democracy right now. I'm actually quite optimistic about our ability to pull ourselves out. And the reason why I'm optimistic is that I'm seeing in just a few short years, more and more Americans appreciating and vocalizing the problems that they're seeing in the electoral system, problems with low participation, problems with low competition, problems with lack of accountability. And many people still aren't connecting those problems to the reforms that could help begin to alleviate those problems. But there is a receptiveness like I've never seen before to those conversations, to wanting change in their communities, to organizing around change. We're here at Open Primaries are playing a small role in that, as well as many of the organizations and leaders on this call. And I'm really excited about what the future holds for our ability to pull us out of the state we're in now and move to a better position in the future. So thank you.
Danielle, this is Peter. I'd like to make one comment. I'd like to actually make two comments. First, I'd like to introduce Sarah Smallhouse. Somebody had asked in the chat about what was going on in Arizona, and Sarah is working on some really interesting projects in Arizona. And so anybody who's in Arizona, Sarah Smallhouse is the go-to person. The second thing I'd like to say is I agree with all the things you just said, Jeremy, and I agree with what Ned said. So the question is, can you be optimistic and pessimistic at the same time? And I think that our next presentation is going to be on the subject that Ned brought up, which is what is the risk in the electoral system to our democracy? I think the good news is that a lot of people are becoming very energized about this. I think the bad news is that there are a lot of holes in the electoral system that could really jeopardize democracy. So that's going to be the subject of our next presentation at the end of February. And I think it's going to be the most important presentation we've had.
I would share as well an invitation to Ned and to some of the others who've worked with us in the past. And I'd refer you back to our June 9th announcement of a task force that Ned's on, and Ned's been on quite a few of these initiatives. I hope we will be able to continue the discussion then. I'm optimistic that we had well over 100 attendees tonight, and given the amount of Zoom fatigue people have experienced, that's a great turnout, and I hope we can continue it, not just to discuss the issues, but also to discuss the solutions. And I think there are solutions, some of which really need to be taken in 2022 to avoid the kinds of crises that we could see on the radar screen for the future. I certainly want to thank everyone for attending. The chat dialogue I would like to try to distribute to the participants, because there's quite a lot of good questions as well as some good answers in the chat, and I think we can probably get that to the participants this afternoon. I mean, we won't get it out that quickly, but we'll get it out to who participated. So thank you all for coming. I wish you a good evening. I hope that we'll have a happier year ahead with some of these problems, both with COVID as well as with our election processes being managed better and giving us more grounds for optimism in the future. Certainly thank you, Daniella, for coming in and moderating with us. I thank the state representations. I think Alaska has taken an enormous and important step forward. I hope Pennsylvania will do the same. Maine is a great example of how it can be done effectively in what are called the non-initiative states, which I think are about 24 of them. So it's not quite a majority, but significant. So look forward to the meetings in February. Please look forward to look for the invitations from us once we get the announcement together. And you're welcome to take a look. We'll certainly have them posted on our website, which is reformelectionsnow.org. Any other wrap-up questions or points? I know, Jeremy, you could speak for a long time about Arizona. There were some questions there. There were also questions about Nebraska. And I'm sure the problem is that a lot of these things need to be done one state at a time. With 50 states, that's a big challenge.
Just folks can come to openprimaries.org, learn more about the issue, and get involved.
Thank you again, everyone, and have a good night. I'll leave the chat open for a couple of minutes more so that people can make copies if they wish directly, so they're not totally dependent on our ability to handle the technology and get them information out.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Daniela.
Thanks, Daniela.
Thank you.
And thank you, Ned, for your participation as well.